Hot showcases. I've been meeting something. Yeah, you can. You can actually have both people at the same time.
¿Correcto?
No, yeah.
La cabeza, tráemela para ver cuál entrada viene.
Ahí tiene los nombres, si no, nomás te mando la.
Twice telling you to get signed up, but you never signed up, man.
So I'm doing the Cannery, outdoor power, doing mouth power probably next week. I have killer equipment, which is the silver, third east. So I'm going to update as much as
Okay, you have to keep it close.
If you guys don't know me, my name's Andrew. I work for Stihl. I'm kind of the Chicago area tech guy. So if you guys have tech questions, any kind of warranty issues, if you think you might need my contact info down the road, I've got some business cards up here. Feel free to take one and contact me with any issues relating to Stihl. But today we're talking about safety and maintenance on chainsaws. So that's kind of me up there and my information. This is what I'm going to cover. Not going to bother reading through that. We'll just kind of go through it slide by slide. Show of hands, how many people have actually read one of these instruction manuals? Maybe two, three people, 4 people. That's actually a pretty high number. Typically when we have groups anywhere from 50 to 100, I see maybe 3, 4, 5 people just like today. Typically, my thing is if it could potentially hurt me or it's very expensive, I'm going to read this manual. There's a lot of good information in it, and if you look, there's all sorts of warnings all over these things. We shouldn't have to warn you guys that a chainsaw is dangerous, but our legal department puts them all over. The other thing too is one of the biggest questions I get is how to maintain certain aspects of the chainsaw. We've got a maintenance schedule in here that tells you what you should be checking on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and a yearly basis. If you don't have these, you can go to stihlusa.com and you can look up in our manuals section. We have manuals going back probably 30 plus years on all the equipment that we sell. There's been several times where I've even brought it up on my cell phone just because I didn't know the answer to a question. So there's a lot of good information in here, and most of the presentation is based off of what we have in the instruction manual anyways. Pretty much anything we sell, you have a potential for injury, and that's why we have a recommended list of PPE. If you guys look up here on the table, I've got all sorts of PPE, and as time goes on, we just keep adding more and more and more to the mix. So part of the reason we've got this PPE is when we sell our chaps and our protective gear, we include it with a little chart that tells you where the injuries happen, and that's exactly what we've got here on the screen. In 2018, they published this about every 3 years, I believe, and it fluctuates. The highest I've seen is 44,000 chainsaw injuries in a year, and it looks like in 2018 it went down quite a bit because we only had 25,000 injuries. But if you take a look, the lower portion of the body is where we see most of our injuries. That's your legs. And part of it is because nobody likes wearing chaps. I've talked to people who don't even know that chaps exist. They don't know how they work. They don't know what they do. Why do I have to wear them? I've got a quick video that'll show you, but these chaps can eliminate most of those leg injuries that we see, which are about half of the number. The other biggest area is your left hand, and people don't know why. It's because of this guy here. If you guys are using these top handle saws, all saws that we sell are meant to be operated with two hands, but we see a lot of people that are hanging onto a branch, they're cutting over here, or they're holding something away, cutting with one hand. I've seen a lot of arborists out there missing fingertips and full fingers because of one-handing that chainsaw. So those are the two biggest areas of the body where we see injuries. If you look at your feet, protective boots, there's a lot of different rules out there, and what I tell people is just kind of take a look at your employer's handbook and follow the guidelines they put forth. If you look at OSHA's rule on the bottom, I'm not going to read it word for word, but what they're recommending is a steel toe, something that's made of cut-resistant material, provides support above and around the ankle, and it has something like a slip-resistant sole on it. Most employers just say wear a work boot, Composite toe, steel toe, it's kind of up to your employer, but these are some guidelines. We've got some pretty fancy boots. I've got some up here with our name on them. They're probably some of the most engineered logger boots I've ever seen. But typically just a good pair of work boots is what most people wear or recommend. Taking a look at chaps. Now, I bash chaps a lot out there, especially competitors' brands, because you take a look at some of the presentations I've done, a lot of these brands are not very effective. And I think this was with like a 261 that we did this with, which was, one of our pretty standard chainsaws, 18-inch bar and chain on it. I've found that a lot of these brands out there, especially the budget ones as I call them, if you're buying chaps at Menards, Lowe's, Home Depot for $45, $50, don't expect them to do much as far as chainsaw protection. I always tell people if you're wearing a pair of chaps that's manufactured by a company that manufactures chainsaws, you're probably in good shape. But you take a look at ours, and the whole point to it is we've got material that clogs up the clutch drum and it stops that chain from spinning. This is what we use. It's called a warp knitting technique. This is actually a patented material. And the point here is we have 6 to 9 layers, depending on the chaps, of this material to protect your legs. And it's a really intricate pattern with a lot of material. So as soon as that chain grabs that material, it clogs up that clutch almost instantly. Can't really see too clearly, but these are some real world examples. And whenever I'm called in to do safety training, it's either something that's proactive or because there was an injury. So if you guys work for an organization and you want me to come out and do this presentation, I can do that as well. Sometimes people want to see what the chainsaw does with their chaps, and in these instances, we were able to cut through every single pair of chaps that's on this slide. 3 of them are with the Cook County Highway Department, and the other was with a tree company that's out in Wakanda. So sometimes it's surprising, sometimes they work really well, and sometimes it's kind of scary because they don't work at all. So again, do your research when it comes to chaps and protective material. Talk to your industry professionals. Look for some reviews online. Dealerships such as Arlington Power have a very good background in selling this stuff, so they know what people like and what works. Quick video, it's the same video that I always show. It's only a couple minutes long, and what they're going to do is show you how a chainsaw reacts at full throttle with a pair of our Verdict Pro chaps.
I'm Jen Hart.
And I'm Louis Castro.
We wanted to talk to you about why it's so important that you wear cut-retardant caps to Stihl's Verdict Pro protection fabrics from ATEX when operating your chainsaw.
Personal protective equipment is something that you and your family use every day. Whether it's a helmet when you're riding your bike or motorcycle, gear for your kids when they're playing sports, even a seatbelt in your car.
And it makes just as much sense and just as important to wear personal protective items when you're operating with power tools as well, like the gasoline-powered chainsaw.
In particular, chaps are extremely important because they're designed to quickly stop the moving chain on your gasoline-powered chainsaw if it were to accidentally come in contact with you.
Without caps, that could be a very serious accident, and at worst, even fatal. As you can see in this example, our MS-271 is cutting a hard piece of wood, and you can see it cuts the wood very quickly. Just imagine how damaging it could be if that were your leg, and the chain on the saw running at full speed accidentally came into contact with your leg. We'll show you how a pair of Stihl protective caps with a Verdict Pro fibers can reduce the chances of you becoming seriously injured by a moving chain on your saw if it were to come into contact with your cap. We've wrapped our new pair of caps on the saw. With our MS-271 running at full speed, Louis is going to make contact with our cap. As you can see, the chain on the saw stopped almost instantly. The Verdict Pro fibers in the cap, when exposed to the chain cutting through the outer layer, have clogged up the cutting system of the chainsaw and stopped the rotating chain. So, how did our lock fare in this demonstration? The chainsaw never broke through the inner layer of the chaps. Now it's important to understand that no one can guarantee that an injury will not occur or will be less severe because an operator wears chaps. The actual degree of protection afforded will vary with the speed of the chain, the time and angle of contact, power, and torque of the saw, and similar factors. In this case, the operator would have been better off, but they are not intended to substitute good safety procedures.
A couple of important points about this. Your instructions that come with your chaps will give you instructions on washing and drying. Chaps will perform their best when washed prior to their first use. And in the event that your chainsaw comes in contact with your chaps and cuts into the verdict fabric layer, the chaps should be replaced immediately as they have lost their protective effectiveness. But still, as you can see, a new pair is a small price to pay for your sale.
So if you use a chainsaw, make sure that you wear your chaps and other personal protective equipment that is recommended in your instruction manual that came with your saw.
Thanks for watching.
And please, stay safe.
So there's a couple things that I want to add about these chaps. If you take a look at them, if you guys are sizing these, don't use what you would typically look at for like a pair of jeans. We size these from the belt to the ground. So normally I wear about a 32 inseam pair of jeans, and my chaps are actually 36 because it's from the waist to the ground is how we measure it. Some of this stuff too, we've got these new protective jackets. They tell you to wash it first. It actually helps that fiber kind of fluff up and it adds density to it. So you'll notice that like with this protective jacket, where it has the protective material in the shoulders, the arms, and kind of around the back of the neck, it's actually a little bit kind of fluffier when you're done taking it out of the dryer. But that's important. Make sure you wash it. And ours, at least, are meant to be washed. So if you guys get them dirty, spill gas or oil on them, or they just get really nasty, you can wash them in the washing machine and wash them in the dryer, or dry them in the dryer. We don't have a shelf life on these either. So the shelf life, as long as the outside layer is not ripped, cut, or torn, the chaps are still good. And I've seen people that have had chaps for a week and they've cut into them. And then I've seen people that have had chaps for 5 to 10 years because they don't do a lot of cutting and they've never had any kind of incident with them. So not really a shelf life, just keep them clean and try not to cut that outer layer. Part of the reason we wear these chaps is because our chain speed is upwards of 60 miles an hour. And if you look at some of these newer saws, we've got chain speeds of upwards of 65, 70 miles an hour. So at that chain speed, we're looking at about 1,000 cutters that can pass any point at any given second. So like you guys saw in the video, full throttle, that thing drops into the pair of chaps. You already have 1,000 cutters grabbing material to throw into that clutch drum to clog it up. You know, we've done these presentations enough where we actually cut into them live, and this is what you get. This was with the McHenry County Highway Department a couple of years ago with an MS500i, which is our fuel-injected chainsaw, against a 9-layer pair of chaps. And we probably got through a good 6-7 layers of it before it actually clogged that cutting system. Can't really see this too clearly. It is pretty gruesome on a high-definition TV, but this is the common injury that we see. When you're running a chainsaw, you're typically standing like this. That bar and chain are right here. If you lose control of that saw, more often than not, it's going into that left knee or leg area. This gentleman was working on his property all day. He had a pair of chaps, just didn't feel like walking over to the truck. You know, this injury, I think, cost him $3,000 to $4,000 in emergency room fees, and he was out of work for a week or two because of it. So, you know, a $150 pair of chaps is a heck of a lot better than being out of work and spending money in the emergency room when you really didn't need to in the first place. History. We've got a couple tree companies in the area that put electrical tape on this throttle lockout. That throttle lockout's there to help you guys. If you're carrying the chainsaw, it is there to lock out this throttle so it cannot accelerate the chain if a branch or something random were to hit it. Just like all safeties, they're there for a reason. Don't ever override them or delete them. So one of the most confusing things about two-stroke technology is how to start these things. This is our classic master control lever, as we call it, and we have 4 positions here. You know, we see this a lot with homeowners. You know, they get their first chainsaw, they're excited, they don't read the manual, they don't listen to the dealer's instructions. They come back the next day and the thing is flooded. You guys ever flooded a chainsaw? Anybody? I do, I'll admit it. And usually the reason is because I put it on this full choke position and I just keep pulling the cord thinking it's going to fire up. So what happens on this full choke position, or number 1 choke position, is we have a carburetor where we're basically shutting off the complete airway and we're dumping a ton of fuel into the engine with very little air. And doing that, it helps that initial combustion fire up that engine, and we hear kind of a growling noise, or a false start as we call it. After that happens, you should put it up to either that position number 2 or position number 3. And what that does is it opens this airway a little bit to get more air in there to reduce the chance of that flooding happening. So what I do with my saws is if they have this design, I don't pull that rope on full choke more than 2 or 3 times, because if it doesn't pop or start, then you're probably going to flood it. Sometimes I start some of my equipment on position number 2 just because I don't want to flood it. But what we have to remember too is in these 2 positions, we're locking that throttle to an elevated position, so that way if you forget the chain brake, that chain is going to engage and start spinning like crazy. So always remember to put the chain brake on when you fire these things up in that choke or partial choke position. And the O actually means off. You know, we have a lot of people that think O means on. You guys ever left a saw in the on position and pulled that rope 15 times? You're flooding it right away. The off position just means the ignition system is off. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not putting fuel into the engine. So this is confusing. To make it a lot easier, we've got these newer generation saws like this one right here. We've eliminated the choke altogether and we put a triangle position there. What this is for a cold start or out of fuel restart. So if you run out of gas or it's a cold morning, put it in the triangle position and pull the rope till it fires. This is kind of like an auto choke system. That triangle position puts that choke butterfly to the correct position based on temperature of the engine. So it's kind of a lot easier. The other thing I like is when you put it to the off position, it bounces back down to run and the saw is always ready to go. You know, I had an older 461 that I would always leave in the off position. You pull it 6 or 7 times, you yell at the chainsaw, and you realize it's my fault. So these are a lot more simple to get going. They're also better on throttle response and emissions and fuel economy and things like that. So chain catcher, this is a little piece of aluminum that goes underneath the bar. What this is there for is if that chain were to hop off the bar, whether it's loose or whether it's broken, if it's broken, the chain bites into this aluminum so that chain doesn't fly behind you. Very important piece of safety gear on the saw, but I do see a lot of these missing. Typically, they're not more than $10 and they're held in by a screw. They typically take about 2 minutes to replace, if not less. I have heard horror stories in the industry of people missing this. One guy said the chain broke, flew off, and hit a passing car. And then another person told me they actually shattered a window on a house because they weren't paying attention. The chain broke and it flew and shattered the window. So this is definitely something that saves you from property damage and potentially personal injury as well. So our decompression valve is on all of our professional saws. All this does is release a little bit of compression on the top end, so that way it's easier to start the engine and it's easier on your hands. Anybody ever forget to push this on like an MS 880 or a 661? That rope snaps out of your hand violently. So when it comes to oil and fuel, I have a whole other presentation. If you guys want to talk about that for 45 minutes or an hour, talk to me off to the side. But what I will tell you is good fuel is important. You know, once this fuel sits for more than 30 to 60 days, what happens is the fuel degrades and it turns into varnish, clogging pretty much every passageway on this carburetor. So make sure you guys are using fresh fuel, that you're going through it quickly, that it has an 89 minimum octane rating, and that it's a 50-to-1 mix ratio. As far as here, raffle, how do you want to do it? Okay. So what we're doing today is we are raffling off a $200 gift certificate. So if you are the winner, find me because it's going to come from the office. And you can use it towards any Stihl purchase at Arlington Power only. So